Okay, so the next motif after peacock is child of God. Again, this is something to that we should. You can think of it in a symbolic way that to be human, to be a true human being, it means something. That in a sense you can. I'm using the word God kind of loosely here. You can think of you can use a different term that you might want to use, but I think there is something higher about being a true human being in a way that you might see this symbol as to be our best selves, to be because we are children of God, because someone is a child of God, to be to value yourself and to be our best self and to be kind to ourselves, be good to ourselves, and to know that we are valuable. There's something you are valuable, you are worthy, and to think of it in that sense. And despite anything else, nothing can change the fact that you are a child of God. And there is something very beautiful about you, and there is something very there's a higher um, meaning to a child of God. So there's something very nice and very comforting and uh, very positive about that, to perceive it in that way. Like I said, I'm using the word God kind of loosely here. So you can think of it in a higher sense, you can think of it in that way. Okay, so the next motif is river of light or light stream. Okay, so there is a more abstract quality to this. So you can try to imagine a dark landscape, a dark place that you might be present, and seeing a river of light. Instead of a river of water, the flow of it is a flow of light. You imagine light flowing through it. Imagine the colors. Imagine beautiful blue streaks and depths. Imagine a certain purple in it. Imagine shimmers of white light in it. And try to think of movements in this river of light or light stream. And there is a nice symbolic meaning to it. Light itself, for light itself in a metaphysical sense, it's a very interesting metaphysical concept. It is very direct. We are it speaks to you visually and not in terms of meaning, but there is, in terms of, apart from the sense of meaning, in light itself there is beauty. With light you can sort of imagine enlightenment. And so there is a concept of darkness vanishing where there is light. So can you imagine a river of light? In what ways, what concepts might this symbolize? There's concepts of beauty, there's concepts of enlightenment, there's concepts of darkness disappearing, there's concepts, imagine a person walking in darkness and coming across a river made of light. There is, uh, imagine what a beautiful sight that would be to a person who might be wandering in the darkness. So, or who might be lost in the darkness, or who might be looking for light. So you don't necessarily have to be lost to be looking for something. You can you might be trying to find meaning. Maybe there's a concept of meaning to it. So it's a very interesting motive, the way I think about it. You can think, because this is a bit more abstract, I think there are many ways. You don't necessarily have to interpret a meaning to this. You can sort of perceive it for what it is and just enjoy the beauty of it. Imagine, and that doesn't necessarily have to be darkness around. That was one way of interpreting this visually. You can think of a different surrounding. In maybe it's dusk, maybe it's dawn. What would that symbolize? To find a river of light at dusk, to find a river of light, a light stream at dawn. So there is a more interesting way of thinking about. Think of the environment. Think of all the other symbols that might be present. Think of the astronomical symbols that might be present. Think of a dusk with, think of twilight time. Think of a certain phase of the moon. Think of certain stars and constellations that might be visible. And think of the terrain that might be around you. And then there is that river with light flowing through it. An interesting concept. It can be perceived in different ways. A great symbol, and yeah, something, lots of elements to it, right? Maybe there's an element of discovery to it, and of course, an element of beauty, and just direct beauty that you see it, and it's just beautiful the way it is. Even if you ascribe no other meaning to it, there is a direct beauty to it. So yeah, interesting sort of symbol. And yeah, I think, again, this can be perceived in a lot of different ways. So for now, I think that much speaks some amount about it. So let's move on to the next one. Okay, so the next is high tide. An interesting, a more direct, uh, a more a symbol that is not too vague. What things could a high tide mean? Could a high tide mean high spirits? Could it mean more positivity? Could it mean the way water behaves in a high tide is that it's energetic. Sometimes water can, it can hit certain rocks and shoot up, and so there is that symbol of energy in it, lunar energy, in combination with, like I previously talked about, Luna, all the phases of the moon, and full moon, new moon, or everything else in between. And yeah, so maybe there's some, this is that energy working with water. And so yeah, an interesting symbol, maybe a symbol of energy, maybe a symbol of movement. And yeah, so the next motif is sunrise and sunset. Okay, you might want to think of this motif in terms of a cycle. You might want to perceive them in the sense of, um, in the sense that uh, in the sense of transience. You might want to think in terms of, uh, in terms of, if there, after every sunset there is a sunrise, you might want to perceive it in that sense of positivity. And sunrises and sunsets are both very beautiful. I cannot decide which one I like more. I think I would say I love both of them, and they both have beautiful atmosphere that they create, uh, very nice colors, and different sort of mental energies that are present at sunrise and sunset times. But both of them beautiful. I think maybe I like sunrises more. There's an elevation to it. I think there's more positivity to it, and sunrises are beautiful. Maybe it has also to do with, I don't know, sunrises are, it might speak to us in more of a biological sense as well, with circadian rhythm. Is that what you call it? What do you call it? Uh, I hope I'm pronouncing that right. Okay. And so yeah, there is, with sunrises and sunsets, um, again, you can think of it in the sense of cycles as well. So yeah, in the sense that there's always a sunrise after a sunset. So you can perceive it in that sense and other ways as well. Okay, so the next one is similar. The next motif is day and night, and also in the sense of, also with day and night, morning, afternoon, evening, and night. So you can, again, a more cyclical thing. Um, I think different times of the day has different sort of energies to them, uh, different ambience to it. You might like certain activities more during certain times of the day. There are different aesthetics to them, and in many ways you can arrange your activities around different times of the day. So again, a more symbolic thing, a very basic, I guess you could say, a more direct and literal sort of symbol. But yeah, you might want to think in what way you want to perceive them. You might want to pick one at one point and see why you thought of that, and in what way is that point appealing to you at that time. So yeah, an interesting way to sort of look at again the cycle of yeah, a cycle. And the next one, the next motive is again related to this cycles, which is seasons. All the different seasons, you know, spring, summer, autumn, winter. You can think of all other types of seasons. You can think of in different in the sense of snow and rain and wind, and you can think of um, atmospheric things. And I don't know what kind of meanings uh, I would attach to this, but again, you can sort of think of this in a sense of cycles, and sort of think in what way you might want to think about this. Okay, so the next motive is mountain peak. An interesting symbol to think of it in that way. You can think of a mountain peak. Um, okay, yeah, uh, two things about this. Okay, so first you can visualize a mountain peak, right? You can think of it, imagine visually in your head, looking at a mountain peak, and it has a nice, that somewhat triangular uh, structure to it. You can imagine maybe there's some snow at the top of it. Maybe you can think, maybe you're looking at it at during 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 twilight hours. So maybe there are some stars around it too. So, and there's that nice mild light that is still visible, but it's not direct light. So you can, that's one way of, you know, you can visualize it. You might visualize it at night, maybe in complete darkness of the night. You might want to see how this mountain appears. Maybe it has a nice ominous sort of look to it, in a beautiful way, with stars around it. Maybe, yeah, maybe you can imagine it in different types of weather. So now there are two sort of perspectives that you can look. You can think about this motif of a mountain peak. You can think of yours, of the vantage point of being on top of a mountain peak, looking outwards, or you can imagine, and you can imagine it in the sense of being away from the mountain peak and looking at it, and looking at the way it looks in that landscape. So interesting ways. The vantage point of being on top of a mountain peak, maybe it's an interesting symbol. You can think of it in the sense of a great sort of a peak. There's something that has that's, you feel something about you that has uh, climbed onto a peak. You can think of it in that way. There's that concept of greatness to it, of in a more symbolic way. You can think of it in that way, being at a peak, looking outwards, looking at the entire world. You might see so much more, you might be able to see so much farther away. And yeah, a nice symbol of greatness. You can think of it in that way. And many other ways of looking at it. Like I said, with all of these motifs, there are many ways you can look at it. So the next one, uh, the next one is a happy encounter. You can think of it as something that maybe you were looking forward to, or maybe it's something that is a serendipity. Maybe you weren't looking forward to this and you just encountered something amazing. Maybe this is a person, maybe this is certain type of something that you were looking forward to. And maybe it surprises you in a good way. Maybe it's something you weren't expecting. Maybe you were sort of expecting it, maybe you were something unsure of it and you encounter it. Maybe you were it was completely unexpected. So you can sort of think of it in again, a nice, you can think of it in a sense of intuition, and in what way you might want to think of it. Think of in different situations, in the sense of different um, characters, and think in what way does this sort of speak to you. Interesting way to think about it. Like I said, this is sort of for, you can, when you apply, sort of uh, think about this in terms of situations. It's a fun way to think about it, but like I said, to always make rational decisions. And this is something to sort of, uh, kind of have fun with, and to play with your imagination and intuition a little bit, and to have fun with it. So yeah, um, yeah. The next motive is torch of everlasting glory. So, uh, in what way? First of all, you can imagine this. In what way you might want to imagine this visually? Again, this is a very in terms of aesthetics, there is a very high aesthetic to this symbol. Uh, think of uh, think of a character holding that torch, and this torch is of everlasting glory. In terms of what it means to be someone, to be yourself, and to be to embrace your greatness. You might want to think of it in the sense of that this greatness that is within you, it is, you can sort of think of that as a symbol, that the symbol of that is a torch of everlasting glory. And there is the concept of, with a torch, there is the concept of um, light and heat emanating from it. There is also, like I said, this is everlasting in the sense that it lives on, it, and it doesn't fade away. So there is, I think, in a great way, there's a symbol of something higher in it. Something, there's a symbol of greatness in it. So yeah, the next motive is eternity or forever. In again, in some, this is a more, I guess you could say, a more abstract concept just on its own, because you're imagining forever or eternity. So an interesting way, I don't know how, in what ways, because you can perceive this in so many different ways, in different sort of contexts that you might want to imagine this in. So I think these concepts by themselves have an interesting way of, that you can think of it in those ways. But um, there's a nice sort of mathematical quality to it as well. So you might want to think in what way you want to think about this. So the next motive is eternal soul. And I think this, you can think of it in the way that you, as in who you are, is in a sense that who you are deep within you, in an absolute sense of self, in a sense of who you are, uh, is, there is an eternal quality to it. Can you say that in one way or another, our souls, and as to who we are, it lives forever. It is beyond time. It is beyond, um, there is something immaterial to it. It is something that is not bound by material, it's not bound by time. There is an eternal quality to it, and it is you that is eternal. It is the very thing that makes you, the way, if I say you, the way you perceive it, in a more, in a very direct sense as to who you are, and to understand that, to think of this as a soul, and that is eternal. I think there's an interesting sort of meaning to it. Like I said, this is another concept that you could really get into, but for now, I think this is where I'm going to describe it and go on to the next one, because like I said, this is an interesting way of looking at it, and a lot can be said about this, and a lot of perspectives can be taken on this. So yeah, I'm going to move on to the next one. The next, there are two motifs. I think I'm going to list them simultaneously. They're separate, but I think I'm going to list them simultaneously. I've talked about them before, and these are night vision and color vision. There is, I mean this in a metaphysical sense. Night vision is the ability to see in the darkness. In a symbolic meaning of this, there are so many different ways that you can perceive this. You can think of it as a symbol of enlightenment. You can think of it in the sense of possessing knowledge and seeing things that are not very not right uh, directly visible to you, but you can think of it as sort of being able to, I mean, not sort of, that's what it is, being able to see in the dark. So yeah, an interesting symbolic meaning about it. I've talked about it before, so I'm going to, and the next was color vision. Again, an interesting expansion of the ability to see with colors. It is one thing to see light and darkness, but when an entire layer of colors are added to it, and there is an entirely different meaning of beauty that becomes added to it. There are various harmonies that can be played with colors. And it's not just in the sense of light and dark, but now there's an entirely different spectrum to it that you can work with. You can also think of this, an expansion of this spectrum isn't beyond the colors of, between all the wavelengths that are visible to the human, that we can see as humans. So think of an expansion, think of new qualia, think of new colors. We can't really think of it, but I don't know if we can think of it or not actually. But you can think of in terms of an expansion. So before, with night vision, there was the ability to see in the dark. With this, with night vision, there was the concept of sort of enlightenment. With this, you can think of in the sense of expansion, an expansion of beauty. So like I talked about previously with these two concepts, you can sort of, in a loose sense, you can sort of relate these two concepts of night vision and color vision. You can relate them to masculine and feminine, in the sense that with the feminine, there's more beauty to it, in the sense that there is that expansion of beauty. And these are sort of related concepts. With night vision, there is a more mechanical sense to it. But yeah, there is that nice these two ways that, and the way they connect, there's a very interesting way. There's a nice duality to it. So interesting concepts, and like I said, I've talked about them before, and I have a lot more to say about these two concepts. I'll probably make another video entirely and talk about them. But in terms of these motifs, I think these are ways that you can think of these motifs, and what sort of meaning you might want to see these concepts in.